She's bugging me. She'll get tired in a minute, go back, get something to eat, and then come back.
In Module 3 now, we're going to talk about where you're going to put your hives and how you install them. We have some good video demonstrations coming up on that. Really, though, the first thing you need to do is check with your locality to find out what the regulations are. Sometimes there are no regulations and you can pretty much do what you want. Other times, though, different municipalities have some restrictions, and that might mean how close you're allowed to put them to your neighbors. It might mean you pay a small fee. Just double check so you don't get in trouble. Let's talk about where you're going to put your hives. One of the most important things is the direction of the entrance. Ideally, you'll want that entrance to face east to southeast.
Southeast, the weather usually comes from the west, and you want the hive to be protected. And the southeast is where the sun's coming up, and it hits the entrance to the hive and encourages the girls to go to work early.
The orientation to the sun is probably one of the second most important things. You want that hive to get full sun from morning to night if possible. The hives will do better, although in some situations shade is okay too if it's hot. But drainage, air drainage is by far the most important thing. You want a site that's sloped away, that air drains. If you have a location that's foggy, that gets foggy down in a bottomland or something, that is not very good for bees. So, nor is by the lake or a stream or water is not that great for bees. One of the worst bee yards I've ever had in my life set between a river and a lake. And it was not it was a quarter-mile strip of land, but the bees never made any honey there for whatever reason, and I thought it was because they couldn't ripen the honey that they did get.
Another important thing to consider is a water source. They do need water nearby. The thing is, though, if your neighbors have a swimming pool, that's not going to go over very well if your bees are going over to get a drink from their swimming pool.
Well, one of the worst things you can do is irritate your neighbors with bees flying across their property. They will get upset at you and never forgive you.
So you might want to provide your own water sources even closer to the hive. Bird baths are great. Just make sure that you also put some stones or some marbles in the bottom so the bees can land on something and get some water and they don't drown. The height of the hive off the ground is something else to consider.
You'd like to have them 18 inches off the ground. It makes it, if a raccoon or a skunk comes to eat the bees, it has to stand on its hind legs and exposes its belly when the bees come out. So it's a lot easier for the bees to get a hold of the intruder.
The thing is, though, if you're short, like me, you don't want your hive to be too tall because you're going to be lifting boxes, and once you get up over your head, it becomes quite difficult.
If you have a really good hive and you're stacking lots of honey supers on, anything that's used for honey is called a super. Anything that's raising bees is a brood box, no matter what size it is. So if you stack 5 or 6 honey supers on, they can get really high and they can weigh up to 60, 70 pounds. So you're lifting that above shoulder level. It can be difficult.
Or if you're really tall, you don't want to be stooped down really low inspecting the hive for a long period of time because that's really hard on your back. So think about that when you're doing your hive stand. It's also important that you pick a good spot in your yard pretty much off the bat because it's hard to move the hive. And I'm not just talking about because it's heavy. It's also confusing for the bees. If you move a hive more than 3 feet from its original location, it confuses the bees. They recognize the yard, but their hive is gone. So the rule is move them less than 3 feet or more than 3 miles. If you move them more than 3 miles, when they fly out, they do an orientation flight and they can find their way home, but they get sort of confused for some reason if it's in the same yard. So you really want to be careful and put a lot of thought into the hive location. You also want the bees to have enough room when they fly out of their front entrance, that they have enough room to fly out and get going. You don't want to put it right up against a fence or a line of trees or some bushes or anything that would inhibit their flight pattern. You also, though, want to be nice to your neighbors, so don't put the hive entrance facing right where your neighbors hang out a lot. They won't like that very much. You might want to tell them what you're doing. Again, a little bit of honey goes a long way, and some communication with your neighbors is really important. In terms of the bees finding nectar sources and pollen sources, they can fly 3 miles to find the food that they need. So you don't necessarily need something right in your own yard. They can fly off and find something. We have a lot of beehives on some rooftops in downtown Pittsburgh, and the bees are able to fly out and get what they need and come right back. But you do want to be nice to them, and if you have a yard where you can plant a lot of pollinator-friendly plants, that's a great idea. So now it's time to talk about how to install your bees, and we're going to show you how to install both packages and nukes. Again, the best time to do this is about 6 weeks before the nectar flow starts, so your bees will be up and ready to go when that happens. Let's start by showing you how to install a package of bees. Again, the most common size is a 3-pound package. First, you'll want to pry open the top cover. Inside is this can of sugar syrup, which the bees have enjoyed on their trip. The queen comes in this little cage, which is inside the package. She's protected in here, so the worker bees have time to get used to her smell and accept her, or otherwise they just sting her to death. When a beekeeper made up this box of bees, the queen was not part of this hive, and they might have killed her. So during the trip, hopefully, they've slowly become used to her pheromone, and we're hoping that they will accept her. The queen will have a couple of worker bees in there in the cage with her as attendants. The first thing you do is spray right through the cage some sugar syrup, a 1-to-1 sugar-water formula. Make sure you start out with hot water so the sugar dissolves really well, but then let it completely cool down before you spray the bees with it. This is going to calm them down, doing a couple of things. It's going to make it hard for them to fly because they're covered in sugar syrup, but it's also going to give them food to attend to that's going to keep them pretty busy.
I spray them with sugar water at least an hour beforehand, so they eat that. And the fuller they are, the harder it is for them to sting and to do anything. So you like a bee that's full of honey, sugar water, whatever.
Take out the can of syrup and then take out the queen and set her in a shady spot for a minute while you get the hive ready. You'll need to take out a couple of frames from your hive to make room so you can dump in the bees.
And what you do is you open the package up and you literally just dump the bees into the box.
And just bang a corner of the box down onto the hive and the bees will quickly drop down into the hive. This is not going to hurt them. You can be firm because the quicker this is all over with, the calmer everyone will be. If you do have a whole lot of time, you can always just turn over the cage and let them find their way down. But that takes a while, and you really need to get the queen in there ASAP. So my advice is just bang them down quickly, one fell swoop. You'll see they're fine. If any bees happen to remain in the cage, just set it at the hive entrance and they'll make their way in once you put the queen in.
And then put the queen, you remove the cork from the candy end and put her between frames, and they'll slowly eat that out.
And you'll see that there's candy under that cork. Leave the candy in there. The whole idea is the honeybees will eat that candy and slowly release the queen. Place the cage with the candy side angled up and secure it like this between the two frames. Then you can gently put the frames back in one by one, and be gentle with this. You don't want to squish any bees because a pheromone will be released and the other bees will get annoyed at you. Beekeepers have a lot of different ways of doing this, but this is what we do. The candy side needs to be slightly up, so if a worker bee dies in the cage, she won't block the hole and the queen can still get out in a timely manner. Before you close up the hive, you do need to feed them. Remember, there's no honey or pollen in there, so they need a little bit of help from you. You want them to be happy and healthy in here and have a really good start. And also remember, they need to eat 6 to 8 pounds of honey in order to make a pound of wax in order to build their hive. So you should have a hive feeder of some sort in there, and you should fill that with a gallon of 1-to-1 sugar water. Soon, of course, things will be out there blooming and they'll be able to handle all this on their own. But right now, they need a lot of help from you. You will need to come back in a few days and make sure that the queen has been released. If she hasn't been released yet, give her a little help. Let her out. See what happens. See if the worker bees accept her. If she's dead in the cage, then you're going to need to go out to a beekeeper and buy another queen bee and start that whole process over again. Okay, that was it for the packages. And now let's talk about the nukes. And this is a whole lot easier. So again, the mini hive or the nuke, the nucleus colony, already has a queen in there. You do want to be really careful though as you're moving out the frames because you don't want to squish the queen accidentally.
Nukes is pretty easy. All you do is you open it up, put the 5 frames in the middle of a 10-frame box or 8-frame box, whatever you choose to use. And then fill it in with empties on the side. And what you can do is they start to move out. Bees tend to want to move up. You can give them a second box, and when they move up into it and get a couple frames filled out, you can take those frames and move them back down to fill out ones that maybe they didn't fill out down below. Because bees in a habit, if they're in a tree, they're moving straight up. It's not a big area like what we have. We've forced the bees to sort of adapt to what's convenient for us.
Nukes will probably be ready to expand pretty quickly, so you'll have to keep an eye on it. They do have a couple of frames of honey in there already, but they need your help again, so make sure that you feed the nuke. And if you can afford it, it's always a good idea to start with 2 hives, and that way you have something to compare each other to, and you can more quickly recognize if there's a problem in one of them. Before you close up your hive, you're going to want to make sure that the frames are really close together. So use your hive tool and push the frames really close together. You don't want to leave any gaps in there because the bees will build comb and put propolis in there and make it really difficult for you to pull out the frame to inspect them. So keep them really close together to make it easier on you and easier on the bees. You want to make sure that they're healthy. In terms of the next time you come back to inspect, in the summer, you should check on them about once a week or so, and in the winter, only about once a month. So when it comes to location and installing a hive, just remember these 3 things: sun, space, and sufficient food. All right, let's move on to Module 4.